I kick off this drawing using a Liquitex Paint Marker. These marks are permanent and will create some chaos from the beginning. It's a great way for me to break into a blank piece of paper and make something that I can work with. I now move on to using the pan pastel. The pan pastel I use with a makeup sponge, and I start to apply shade to the areas where I want the facial features to go. I love working with this pan pastel, and I find it very easy to rub out, so it's very possible to add and take away at this stage of the process. So I'm not too precious about where I put my marks. I just follow my gut instinct. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what gut instinct means for me, or intuition, because I think that is a really huge part of the way I do art and the way I like to operate. It's all about coming into the zone where you are just following that inner guidance system and just letting go of the thoughts that can otherwise get in the way and talk you out of believing in your work or believing in your process. So some questions I've got in regards to intuition, and I'm trying to answer for myself, is how do I recognize when it's my intuition talking, and how do I know when it's just a fleeting thought? And what exactly is intuition? Is it myself, or is it God, or where is this knowing coming from? Why is this important? Is it important? What happens if I don't follow my intuition? Those are some of the questions that I've been looking at and trying to map out for myself. And I've decided to share a few stories from my life and ask you the question, do you think that was my intuition? And have you got any experiences like this? And of course, most importantly, how does this all relate to my art practice and my process? But if you are willing to share some of your thoughts on this subject, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. So let me know of experiences you have had with this. I find this whole thing deeply fascinating. So the first story I want to share with you is the story of when this attic space was born, which is now the studio where I'm sat right now and I'm working. It was 2019, it was August, and I remember sitting in the living room on the floor one day with my 1-year-old daughter napping. And I just started having the feeling of being drawn to work in the attic. I was thinking about starting back up with doing my artwork again, and I was wondering where in the house I could set up a little desk and start working. And the attic came to mind, and I just was thinking, this is such a bad idea. The attic is dark and not insulated, there's no windows, and it is absolutely filled with junk. But I just couldn't shake the feeling of being drawn up there. It was really inviting somehow. I just had this sense of, okay, this just doesn't make sense. But for some reason, it's just what I want to do. I sat down with a piece of paper and wrote down pros and cons, because I realized it was going to be quite a mission to empty the attic of junk. And especially considering I had a 1-year-old, I would have to use her nap times, which seemed like way too active an idea for me at the time as a pretty exhausted mom. And of course, the list of cons was much more comprehensive than the list of pros. But sitting there with my list, I just had this feeling that I recognized that the thought of going up in the attic and working there gave me a sense of joy, and I felt a kind of warmth and excitement about it. It was like my heart was expanding a little bit, And those markers, I think I would put down now as marks of intuition, especially in hindsight, having had this experience. But there's more to this story, so let me keep going with it. But I recognized the joy that I felt when I was considering setting up a little workstation in the pitch dark in the attic. So I decided to just go with that joy, that feeling of excitement. So it was around August and September in 2019 that I started climbing up that tiny metal ladder and clearing out the attic bag by bag. I would just grab a handful of bags, put them in the car, and this was while my little 1-year-old girl was asleep. So she would take a little nap, and I would do this process over and over until the attic was empty. I would just leave the bags in the car, and then at the weekend I'd go take it to the dump or to the recycling center. Once I'd done the clearing, I brought in my bags of sand and cement because, of course, I was making sculpture. So I was bringing up these huge, heavy bags of cement up the little metal ladder. And this had been one of the reasons I was hesitant to start the process, because I thought this was a really bad idea. But that feeling was so strong, so I just went ahead and did it. So once I had started working up there, which by the way I loved, it was dark, it was cold at that time. The autumn has set in and it was cold up there, but I just loved every minute. So while I was up there in the space, my husband started to recognize the fact that this was actually a really nice size space and it was worth doing something about it. And we had a bit of money set aside that really probably should have gone to fixing up a lot of other areas of the house that was in need of getting done. But we were both in agreement that it would be really wonderful to get some windows put in and get a stairway put into this room and just make it into a little workspace. So we decided to go ahead and ask. We'd had this builder in once before, had helped us out with some small building jobs around the house, who was a really nice guy and we really liked. So we contacted him and asked if he would be interested in doing those adjustments to the house. And he agreed amazingly. And I think this was now, we are in December of 2019. So at the beginning of the new year of 2020, he came in the first couple of months, and him and his body changed the attic into a really lovely little workspace. And the timing of this workspace being ready was just unreal. It was ready, and just at the last day before lockdown, I think it was the very last day before B&Q closed and everything locked down, that I managed to go buy a desk, put it in the attic, and that was it. And this workspace turned out to be incredible for both me and my husband. From that day on, my husband was working in this little attic space, and I've also been working up here ever since. But I often go back to that moment where I was sitting in the living room with this list of pros and cons, and it just looking like such a bad idea, but just having this sense of joy and excitement taken over, and just feeling like something was nudging me to just go for it, just do it. Don't think too much about it. So I have to say, I do believe in God. And this is one of those situations in my life where I feel like, yeah, that was probably God. I can't remember where I heard this quote, but somebody said that prayer is you speaking to God, while your intuition is God speaking to you. So this was a pretty significant intuition in my development as an artist, as it kind of set up this whole journey that I've been on ever since. And I just think that listening to your intuition as an artist is your absolute superpower. It's something that shouldn't be ignored. I think the more we listen to it, the more joy we start to experience in our lives. I think intuition means inner knowing, and I think this inner knowing is all about knowing your own authentic self. And I think that real amazing art comes from that authentic self. It's just not going to have the same impact if it's something that's been done for the purpose of pleasing others, trying to fit in, trying to be successful. All of that just does not work the same as when you start to tap into your true self. I feel like knowing your true self, knowing your own authentic self is quite a huge challenge. So when I think about trusting in myself, this picture springs to mind of a weighing scale. And on one side, you've got your authentic self. On the other side, you've got the opinion of others. And even if that opinion, and especially if that opinion of others is based in love, in that their love for you, and they want to guide you, and they're giving you advice or just their opinions, and you know that what you want to do doesn't fit their opinion, then that's where that trust has to be heavier on the side of your authentic self. Even if you've got huge respect for the people around you and huge love, that you still have to be brave enough to trust in yourself. So the trust thing is definitely something I'm trying to take on board for myself and learn to do. And it's a process, and it's a bit hit and miss whether I trust myself or whether I override. And it happens quite a bit that I override my intuition. So the next story I want to share with you is the story of Odessa. Odessa is a sculpture that I made, and I started this work a long time ago. It started out as something quite different than what it ended up being. And it kind of describes the journey of me trying to be a conceptual artist and slowly moving into something more intuitive. The idea at first was to create portraits of older women as a kind of a feminist answer to all of the patriarchal busts of older middle-aged men. I wanted to sort of respond to that whole world with a series of older women that I had formed in clay and cast in concrete. So the first person I decided to portray was Sylvia Pankhurst. So I started work on portraying Sylvia Pankhurst and enjoyed the process very much indeed. But the whole thing got put on hold as I ended up getting married, having children, right in the middle of creating her. After creating the bust in clay and making a mold of it in silicone, we moved house, and all of this project ended up in the back of the shed for a number of years. Well, I had finished the clay process and I had made a mold of Sylvia Pankhurst, and when I brought the bust out of the shed, I found myself no longer interested in portraying historical persons, and I felt more interested in portraiture as a kind of existential project rather than something very literal. So I decided to approach this sculpture from a slightly different angle, and I gave myself complete freedom to follow my instinct, to allow intuition to guide me, and just start to play around with new ideas. And so when I was just allowing for images to pop into my mind, the Odessa lily came to mind, and I started to sculpt that and add that as a kind of collaging process, collaging Odessa lilies onto the bust. As soon as I started doing that, I felt I felt good. I felt that was how I like to operate, and I enjoyed the process. So I just let myself have complete freedom to express myself, and I started adding black liquid dripping from these black Odessa lilies, and the whole thing became quite dramatic and very different from the initial Sylvia Pankhurst idea that I had in mind. In hindsight, what became deeply interesting to me was the timing of this whole project, because it was the 23rd of February 2021 when I first started adding the Odessa lilies. Well, that's the first photo I could find of me having added Odessa lilies to this sculpture. And exactly a year later, on the 24th of February 2022, this whole escalation of the war happened, and Russia and Ukraine was in the news constantly, and Odessa was mentioned very frequently in the news as well. But the thing I want to talk about here is really that I found that being able to allow myself that complete freedom to express anything at all, whether sad or happy, I allowed myself to just express it and put it out, and not put a lot of thoughts into it. I didn't have the concept ready. I didn't really have the reasoning for it ready, but all of that seemed to come in hindsight. It all made sense later on, and that's the thing I find about intuition and about intuitive art, that it does have a meaning, and the meaning can go even deeper. And I found it a huge confirmation that this way of working, where I allow myself complete freedom to express, that's where I create something of interest, something that's got a deep meaning to it, and that's also relevant, and that it's really worth listening to this intuition and following it. So I believe intuition is your superpower. As an artist, you can't ignore this, you mustn't ignore this. And I do believe that by listening to your intuition, you may even find that you're listening to God, even if you don't believe in Him. But that's just my personal opinion, and I do apologize if you disagree with me. Even if you do disagree with me about the God thing, I still would just encourage you to listen to your intuition, because even if there is no supernatural element to it at all, I still think that your intuition is a computer within your body that compiles all of the impressions that you are gathering from the outside world, and it gives you a really decent, very well calculated idea of what you should be doing next. So even if there is zero supernatural energy in it, which that is of course not what I believe. I do believe there is a supernatural element to this walk, but I still think that it can work just as a pure science-based theory as well, that your intuition is really important and very worth listening to. And if you were to think of it just super duper logical, that listening to that inner part of yourself, that innermost part that is your authentic self, that will be the place where you can discover what you are about. What do you personally like? What do you love? And what do you enjoy doing? And knowing those things is so gonna help you as an artist, because it will just add that element of intention and conviction, and it will increase your levels of commitment to the work, and you're more likely to practice it more. If all of those things align, your work just will become so much better, and it just will improve. So I just want to go back to summing up on a few things. The way that I've discovered I feel when I have an intuition is that it's often joy-filled. There's often an element of excitement and expansion. There's a good feeling around it. There is a momentum. It's also helps me to take action. The action comes easily and fluidly, and it feels good. On the other hand, I also regularly experience intuitions about not doing certain things, and in those cases, it's often if I'm facing a situation where someone is inviting me to do something that logically I should want to do. I like this person, their suggestion is great, everything seems fine, but for some reason there's a part of me that is saying, no, I don't want to do that. No, thank you. Say no, please. Please say no. And it's not that clear, unfortunately. It's not as clear as that, but I just get what I have now coined as a no feeling. I get a no feeling. So it's quite often that I get this. And so I've noticed that if I do not listen to this no feeling and I decide I'm just going to do this because why shouldn't I? I like this person, I like their plan, let's go ahead and do it. I then say yes, and in that moment when I start saying yes and we make these plans, I get a feeling of overriding something. It feels like I'm overriding myself, and it does not feel good. I just feel this inner kind of resistance, and it's really frustrating because I will then really try extra hard to convince this person and convince myself that I really am into this idea and yay, let's do it. I'm so excited. But the truth is, I'm not excited. I don't want to do it. So I'm learning to really listen to this as well, because on a few occasions where I've noticed this is happening, I've actually had a few things happen as a consequence. Maybe it's a minor accident. Maybe it just turns out to be a really bad experience in terms of it took a lot of energy, it took a lot of time. Even though on paper it seemed like a good idea, it just ended up draining me completely. And then in a couple of occasions as well, I just experienced that when that date came, something was in the way of it and I just wasn't able to attend. So me overriding my intuition is probably a more regular occurrence than me actually following my intuition. And the good news for me personally is that it's never been too detrimental. The lessons I've learned have always been mild. That may have involved some pain or some discomfort, but it has always been reasonably mild. But I do remember on one occasion getting on an airplane where I had a no intuition, and that no intuition was very much science-based, because when we were getting on the plane, we were coming back from Copenhagen to England, and I had my little baby there, and we were getting on this plane, and we could see the engineers outside working on the engine. And at that point, I just had that thought, and I had that feeling in myself that I'm not okay with this. I don't want to be on this plane where they're out there working on the engine. I don't know what's wrong with it, but I don't want to take the chance and be the first person to test out this ride on this plane after they have fixed the engine. And I did not listen to my intuition then. We all got seated and settled down, and we're sitting there for a good half an hour watching them work on the engine. And I did not feel good. I did not like it at all. And thankfully, I was not the only one who had that feeling, and the flight got cancelled just because it actually wasn't operational. But I just wish in a way that I would have had the courage to listen to my intuition and get off that plane and not let that decision be in the hands of other people. This whole journey is definitely a journey of learning to trust yourself, learning to hear what that voice of intuition sounds like, what it is like in you. And I think one aspect of this whole story of learning to listen to your intuition is also learning to separate the intuition from the voice of fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety has its own voice in my case, and I'm sure you might recognize it as well. And fear often will lead you to try and control things. And I just think that learning to know what is fear and what is intuition is really important, so that you can choose what is for your greatest benefit. So the best example I can think of right now from my own life is not an art-related example, but it's an example from this summer where my daughter got sick. We were on holiday and we'd had a lovely day in the sun. It had been super hot and that we had not a care in the world. I hadn't thought about how much my kids were eating and drinking. And so when we were on our way back from the beach, my eldest daughter started feeling unwell. I was worried that she might be experiencing heat stroke, so I tried to get her to drink and to eat. But everything that she would ingest would come straight out, and she was vomiting very badly. And I looked up heat stroke online, and I was reading about it, and I could see it straight away. My heart was filled with fear as I was reading about heat stroke, because it would say things like it's a medical emergency, you need to get to a doctor, etc. And at that point, it was the end of the day, the surgeries were closed, and it was really stressful. So it was a choice of, do we call 111, do we take her to A&E, or do we just let her have a little time and see if she gets better? I got on the phone to 111, and in that moment when I was calling 111, that's where my no intuition came up. And as I had started working on myself this year and started noticing the exact feeling that I would get with this no intuition, I was able to, in that moment, to listen to it. So I just hung up the phone and I listened to my intuition, and it was clear. I just felt very clearly that the best thing for my daughter would just be to be left alone for the night, and just to obviously be watched closely by me, which I did, but just allow her to vomit everything out and just to have a chance to get better, instead of leaving this holiday camp where in an area where we didn't know the way to the A&E and start driving around in the middle of the night with a child who's vomiting. And so that didn't seem like a good idea anyway. But it was really that moment of recognizing really clearly, I've been here before. I've had this no feeling before. I have been overriding it in the past because of fear, which causes me to try to control things. But in that moment, I felt, because of the experiences I had made and because I had taken my time to note down what it feels like when I get a no intuition and I override it, I had the moment and the clarity of mind to say, okay, I'm gonna listen to my intuition in this case. I'm not just gonna rush around all night tonight and do things out of a sense of control, compulsion or control, but I'm actually going to just keep a close eye on my daughter, and we'll just stay right where we are. And I definitely did not regret listening to this intuition, because as it turned out, it was just a good old vomit bug. I feel that it's so important to learn to trust in yourself, Are you going to let everybody else make the decisions for you, or are you going to listen to yourself, your inner voice, and actually trust it? But I think it's a really good idea just to start really small, because for a lot of us, there's a whole uncovering process to do when it comes to actually identifying the actual voice of the intuition, and that learning what it sounds like for you. Because in this podcast here or drawing session, I have shared with you what it sounds like or what it feels like for me. But I know lots of people where it just comes differently. It's unique to the person how your intuition shows up. So, but it's super exciting, and you must promise me that you will start uncovering that process of finding your intuition, because I just think we are all sitting on a gold mine, and this gold mine is you. It is me. So if we can find who it is that we really are, then we will find so much goodness, so much joy. We will find our purpose. We will be connected to trusting ourselves, and just living with a much greater joy. So if you are still with me now, I have to say, I feel that it is safe to say that we are now friends, because anyone who can listen to me talking in one stretch for more than 20 minutes, I would classify as a friend. So I just want to thank you so much for listening to what I had to say, what's in my heart. It feels amazing that someone would be listening to me at this point. I would love to know your opinion in regards to the length of these videos. I have left them unedited for them to show the full process of drawing one of these pictures. I just wanted there not to be any speeded up footage, but if you would prefer, I could easily make these a bit shorter and just have some parts speeded up as well. And I would really love to know what you think about that. I also wanted to say that if you do want to use this reference, you're very welcome to use it as you wish. This is a reference I have generated. This one is generated using Leonardo AI. I think either it was Leonardo or Da Vinci. Just used an app on my phone, and I typed in a prompt, and I got this photo from it. And you are very welcome to make use of it. If you create a drawing and you want to make prints of it as a result of this drawing session, I would be super happy that it was usable for you and that you're excited about your work. So please go ahead and do what you want to do with it. It's free to use. So again, thanks so much for watching, and I wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful creative journey. Take care and all the best.